Story 1. A couple of years ago, I had an unforgettable experience at a job that left me reflecting on the impact of being undervalued. I worked for a company handling their media design, which included graphic design, photography, live event audio-visual setups, video editing, and more. Over time, I was assigned responsibilities far outside my original role until I was essentially doing the work of at least 4 people. On top of that, the company refused to provide funding for the equipment I needed. Everything essential for media and event production came out of my own pocket. To protect my investments, I made sure to label all the equipment with my name, and over the years, I built up an impressive collection by hunting for second-hand deals and discounts. By my 5th year, I had amassed thousands of dollars worth of high-end gear that was integral to the company's promotional and event production efforts. You can probably guess where this is headed. One day, I was called into my boss's office, where I was informed that the company was downsizing. They had decided to hire someone fresh out of college with no real-world experience to take over my job, as well as several others. I was stunned. To add insult to injury, they had someone from corporate follow me to my office to help me clean out my belongings. His exact words were, "Take everything that is yours. You won't be coming back." So, I did exactly that. It became evident that they expected me to leave with just a small box of personal items, a couple of photos, and maybe a desk plant. Instead, crate after crate of equipment, tools, and supplies were hauled to my car. My 2004 Ford Explorer was packed to the brim. With every trip to my car, I could see the panic growing on my boss's face. At one point, my boss tried to stop me, saying, "You can only take things that are yours." Calmly but firmly, I assured him that everything I was taking belonged to me, and I had receipts to prove it if he needed them. The most satisfying moment was when I informed him that I needed access to the arena's AV booth and catwalk. I'll never forget the look of dread in his eyes. Up there, I unplugged the cameras and other equipment I had been lending to the team, each clearly marked with my name. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, as I gathered everything that had been indispensable to the company's operations. I couldn't help but feel like the Grinch, quietly and methodically taking every piece of gear labeled with my name. Driving away, I felt a mix of heartbreak and catharsis. I had given 200% to that company, sacrificing my time, energy, and resources, only to be replaced by someone younger and cheaper. But I won't deny the satisfaction of watching their panic as I stripped the place bare. Within a year, the company folded entirely. While I can't claim full credit for their downfall, I like to think that losing the equipment they had so heavily relied on played a part. Looking back, I can confidently say it was the worst and most toxic workplace I've ever been in. And the lesson: if they had just compensated me fairly and invested in their own equipment, instead of relying on mine, they might still be around today. Story 2. I always thought these crazy people who don't mind their own business must be a rare breed, and that I would never encounter one of them, but somehow I did. So a little bit of background before I start. I was born in Pakistan, but came to Canada when I was 3. But by that time, I could already speak in Urdu, Punjabi, and Hindi. The languages are fairly similar in many regards. And then I came to Canada, and English was my 4th language. As I grew up, I also learned Arabic, French, and Japanese to varying competencies, but all within the realm of conversational. Having grown up in Canada, I have no accent when I speak in English, so you wouldn't be able to tell me apart from a Caucasian person if you spoke with me over the phone. But also, having learned so many languages, I'm able to pronounce a lot of sounds fairly accurately, so I sound authentic in all languages that I speak to all but native speakers. Most of the languages that I know sound different enough from each other that someone that doesn't know them can still tell that the language is different. I've traveled back home to Pakistan a few times, and I would always encounter those beggars who come with elaborate stories, like, "My wife is sick and she needs surgery, and I managed to get money for that, but I need money for the flight to reach her," etc. I came up with a fun counter to that, which was that I would act like I didn't understand them at all and would start speaking in a different language, a language they wouldn't know. Japanese was my go-to language while in Pakistan. The reaction those people would have was quite hilarious. As per apparently new rules, instead of acronyms, I'll use fake names. I'll keep them all 5-letter names so the columns line up decently enough. So anyway, on to my story now. The cast. Karen, the star of the show. Jimmy, Karen's husband, and a decent human being. Zaraf, me. Wifey, my wife. Singh, restaurant manager. So my wife and I were at an Indian restaurant. We were enjoying our dinner and having a conversation. We speak in a mix of Urdu and English, just mixing with whatever feels easy. To someone listening in, they would be able to understand enough to figure out what we are talking about in most cases. We were sitting at a booth table, so it was only open from one side. Karen and her family, Jimmy and her 2 daughters that looked like they were in their early teens, were sitting at an open table with an empty table between us. My wife is Pakistani like me, and what some Pakistanis like to do is eat rice with their hands. I prefer a spoon myself, but at this time my wife was eating with her hands. Apparently this Karen got offended at seeing my wife eat with her hands. When she came over, I started speaking in different languages, acting like I didn't understand what she was saying in English. I'll translate the conversation. Here's how it went. Karen walks over to our table with a sour expression on her face. Jimmy calls to her, telling her to sit back down and leave us alone, but she ignores him. She addresses my wife directly. Karen, what's wrong with you? Can't you eat your food in a civilized manner like the rest of us? Zaraf in Urdu. Huh? What do you want? Can't you see we're eating? Karen looks at me with surprise. Karen, what did you just say? I say to my wife in Urdu, don't talk to her in English, just do what I'm doing. And then I say to Karen, you're just a crazy woman, go sit back down. Why aren't you speaking in English? My wife starts smiling, and I try hard to keep a straight face. Wifey, we are just enjoying our meal, why don't you go and sit down? Karen, I just heard you speaking in English, I know you can talk in English. Yeah, I can, but I choose to not do so. My wife says to me, I think she's getting upset. And I reply, I know, that's what makes this so much fun. Karen, stop it. Talk in English like I heard you before. Zaraf in Japanese, so you were listening in on our conversation. Don't you have any manners? Karen, wait, that's some other language now. What the hell is this? Jimmy, leave them alone, Karen. They don't speak English. I know they do. They're just pretending not to. It doesn't matter. Just sit down. I start waving toward her table. That's right. Go back to your table, you loud cow. Jimmy. Karen, they aren't doing anything wrong. Leave them alone. Karen, she's eating with her hands. I can't let the girls learn her uncivilized ways. I say to my wife, in Hindi, start licking your fingers. My wife starts licking the rice on her right hand off the top parts of her fingers, and that makes Karen rage even more. Karen, oh my God, look at how gross she is being. Jimmy, stop looking at her if you don't like it then. Then I say in Arabic, hey you dumb witch, do you behave this way everywhere you go? Karen, he changed languages again. I know he did. His accent changed. I then reply in Japanese. Yep, and I can keep changing. Karen, speak in English. Jimmy, you must have heard them wrong. They don't know English. Leave them alone. Then why are they living here? They don't deserve to live here if they don't know English. I was having a hard time keeping a straight face, so I disguised it by raising my voice and appearing angry. I gestured towards her and then pointed at her table. I say in Arabic, are you so dumb you can't even listen to your husband? Go sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. Karen, you don't deserve to be here. Get out. At this point, the restaurant's manager Singh shows up to see what all the commotion was about. He's an Indian guy with a pretty heavy accent when he speaks in English, so I knew he'd speak either Hindi or Punjabi. Singh, excuse me, can you please keep your voice down? What is going on here? Karen, this woman is eating with her hands, and it's disgusting. She's corrupting my children with her barbaric ways. Sing. Ma'am, there are no rules that forbid her from eating with her hands. Please leave them alone, or I'll have to ask you to leave. Now Jimmy gets up and comes over to where Karen is. Jimmy, sit down, Karen. You've embarrassed yourself enough. This is why I can't take you anywhere. I say in Punjabi, ignore this dumb cow. Her brain is smaller than a laddu. An Indian sweet. The manager starts laughing at my comment, and Karen gets even redder in the face since she probably thinks we're making fun of her. Karen, all of you should go back to your country. Jimmy just takes her arm and leads her back to their table and sits her down, telling her to shut up. Her daughters look like they want to sink into the floor from embarrassment. I ramble a few more sentences in varying languages as a kind of venting before my wife tells me to just leave it alone. We finished our dinner about 10 minutes later, with Karen glaring at us the whole time. I go pay the bill, and as we are walking out of the restaurant, we pass near Karen's table. I call out to Jimmy in perfect English, with no accent, while smiling, and I give him a wave. Hey buddy, I hope you enjoy your dinner. Have a good night. Karen's eyes bulge as she screams. Karen, I knew it. See? They know English. She tried to stand up suddenly, but instead ended up falling over backwards in her seat. My wife and I left the restaurant laughing before she could do anything else. Story 3. In a post on a different sub, I mentioned that I took a hiatus from the live entertainment industry for a bit during my pursuit of a bot. One summer during this time, I found a job at a chain bookstore. In this case, it was a larger branch, which opened into the mall it was built off of. This is relevant, as the branch had a rule: once clocked in, employees were not allowed to go through the mall entrance. This was in place due to some people window shopping during break and not making it back on time, keeping others waiting on them. This is extremely relevant, I promise. Another thing to note, I sometimes have issues with my bladder due to a side effect of a medication I was on long term, which can sometimes trigger painful spasms or worse. So, one day, I'm working in the cafe as usual, and I start to feel it, the telltale cramp of impending doom. Between just hypergirl bladder and the cramp, I knew it was urgent. A customer approached the cash register and began to order. I politely stopped them and told them I needed to leave for a second, urgently, and I'd pull my manager from the back to ring them out. Sadly, this too will be relevant later. I leave the cafe at a sprint, headed for the ladies' room, only to find the entire bathroom locked, with a "closed for maintenance, sorry" sign on the door. I called the GM for the store and asked him what I should do. Thankfully, he was nearby and came to unlock it. As he was fumbling for the key, he told me what had happened. Someone had smeared poop, blood, and possibly urine all over the bathroom, like on every surface. Then, threw the contents of the sanitary bins everywhere. A disgruntled customer, he said, likely a rip and buyer. Someone who tears a book and expects a discount for damaged goods. This isn't the Karen we're dealing with, though. He lets me in, telling me the floor was wet, but as I'm an on-the-clock employee, I'd have workman's comp and insurance assistance if I slid down and got hurt. A customer could potentially sue. Plus, I didn't have a choice due to policy. Long setup short, I get out of the bathroom after finding sweet relief. As I'm walking out, I hear a banging. Someone is trying to force the door open. I open the door and start to walk out, when a Karen starts to push past me. Oh my God, why is this door locked? I was confused. Like, lady, there's a big sign that says, "Closed for maintenance." In 20-point font, bold text. I start to apologize and pull the door closed, seeing potential danger. This Karen isn't your typical suburban mom with a bad bob cut, a bumped hairstyle, and a pair of sunglasses that could eclipse the sun. No, this was an older woman. I started to explain to her why it was closed. The woman cuts me off and starts berating me. She asks how people with children are supposed to take them potty if the thing is locked, like there's a bathroom at the restaurant next door or in the food court, not all that far away. I relay this information with an apology and start to head into the back room. My manager had told me to go ahead and start my break while I was out of the cafe. The back room has a code-locked door with a sign saying, "Employees only, no trespassing." I feel like I have a chance to escape this woman's wrath and hide for a second. She follows me all the way from the bathroom, berating me incoherently, dragging along her 3-year-old granddaughter. This lady pushes her way into the back room before the door can shut. I let her follow me, clock out, squeeze out past her, and slip into the adjoining break room. From there, I called my GM again. This woman is in the break room yelling at me so loud, he can barely hear me on the phone. He comes quickly, and she jabs a pudgy finger at me, accusing me of deliberately making her child suffer when he holds a hand up to silence her. Holy hell, it worked. She fell into a pissed-off sputter, followed by silence. "Ma'am," my manager said, "we'll call him Manny." Spotlight me as an employee of the store, acting under direct orders from her manager. "She can't let you in because we had to power wash the bathroom, and it's incredibly slick. If you fell, we would be completely responsible for it. However, as she's an employee, we could cover her injuries easily, and she'd be fairly compensated by our insurance. There's a bathroom a short walk from here, in the food court. I can see you haven't finished shopping yet, and you can leave your unbought merchandise here, and I'll bring it up when you come back to the store." It's a rational explanation, but Karen didn't take it. "No way, just open the bathroom, right now." And she actually stamped her foot and snapped her fingers. Meanwhile, her grandchild, a literal 3-year-old, says, "Grandma, I have to go. Just do what the nice man says, and let's go." Yep, a child is more adult than her grandma. "You see, you're making my poor baby suffer." Then she gets a weird look on her face. "It's because you think I'm a dumb N-word woman, isn't it?" She was black. My manager looks shocked, then Karen says, "I'm going to report you to corporate. What's your name?" "It's Manny, ma'am, and go ahead." This sign applies to all customers, ma'am, I assure you. But I've tried to be reasonable. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Especially since you're trespassing at the moment, in a restricted zone. Now, again, I'm asking you to leave, and telling you that you will not be welcome back. You think you can just push around a woman, don't you, you fat white jerk? I should have known you people were racist when she refused to make me coffee, and dumped it on someone else. Yep, that's where I recognized her. He picks up a phone and begins calling mall security. A little note, the cafe employees at this store are a favorite of mall security. We always get along well, and generally let them hang out with us on their break, when we're not busy. This woman goes ballistic and screams loudly. She takes her young grandchild and walks out into the men's room, barging in past a line of guys, screaming at them to move. After she finishes, she walks back up to Manny and says, "See what you made me do when I could have been assaulted." And she then storms out, all the way out of the mall entrance, while yelling and screaming. "Lady, no one is that desperate," mutters Manny as he picks up the phone and finishes calling security. Turns out Karen made one last trip into the store, escorted by mall security, then left in handcuffs when she tried to assault them when they tried to escort her out. What a day that was. Also, I discovered the manager was planning to offer her a decent discount for her inconvenience. You blew it for yourself, Karen. Story 4. I bought a house in a nice neighborhood, one of its biggest selling points being that it didn't have a homeowners association. After signing the purchase contract, my real estate agent mentioned in passing that the seller had warned her about the next-door neighbor being a bit of a pain. I didn't think much of it until moving day. The moment we arrived, about 10 minutes before the moving van pulled in, the neighbor was already there. He wasted no time introducing himself and began explaining how things worked in the neighborhood. I politely told him we could talk later since I was busy directing the movers, but he wouldn't let up. Even as I tried to organize the unloading, he kept hovering, trying to lay down his rules. Eventually, I went inside, hoping he'd take the hint. He did for a moment. But when I came back out to move my car so the movers could leave, he cornered me again. This time, he rattled off a list of demands. No noise after 8 p.m. because he left for work at 5 a.m. The lawn needed to meet his standards. The mailbox was too close to his property line, and so on. I put up with him for about half an hour before cutting the conversation short to get back to unpacking. That was just the beginning. For the next couple of weeks, he seemed to have a new complaint almost daily. He was always there, watching, waiting for either me or my wife to step outside so he could pounce with a new grievance. It got to the point where I was convinced he was snooping around our property when we weren't home. I decided enough was enough. My wife and I came up with a plan. Before going to bed, I hit the panic button on my car remote, setting off the alarm. I let it blare for a couple of minutes before stepping outside to turn it off. Sure enough, the next day, he was waiting for me when I got home from work. He complained that the alarm woke him up, but I feigned concern, saying I suspected someone might be trying to break into my car. I repeated this tactic every 2 or 3 nights. At first, he'd confront me every time, but I told him I was planning to install cameras to monitor my driveway for security. That's when he panicked. He insisted that surveillance cameras were an invasion of his privacy and even threatened to take me to court if I installed them. His reaction confirmed what I'd suspected: he was snooping on our property. So, instead of cameras, I replaced the outdoor light on his side of the house with a motion-activated floodlight. The standard recommendation was 300–500 lumens, but I wanted to make a statement. I ordered 2 stadium-grade floodlights online, each producing 42,000 lumens. When they turned on, it was brighter than daylight enough to play a nighttime baseball game in my yard. The car alarm mysteriously stopped going off after that, but the lights had their own schedule, turning on at random times when there was movement. Every morning, when my neighbor left for work, the lights would flood his driveway and side of the house like the sun had risen just for him. He complained at first, of course. I told him I was simply securing my property, which was well within my rights. Eventually, he installed blackout shutters on his bedroom windows, and the complaints dwindled. I even adjusted the timer on the lights to ensure they didn't go off when he left for work, because, after all, I'm a good neighbor. The visits and whining became much less frequent after that. He seemed to realize that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when his rules backfired so spectacularly. Story 5. This happened over a decade ago, back before workplace chat tools were common. My boss at the time was an old-school manager, likely past retirement age. He was excellent at most parts of his job, but his methods were firmly rooted in another era. One of my responsibilities was scheduling meetings with our colleagues in Japan, often including him. The catch: he'd get upset if I scheduled these meetings without first checking with him directly, even though his Outlook calendar clearly showed his availability. He insisted I come to his office for this, but he wasn't always there, which made things frustratingly inefficient. To streamline things, I started sending him Outlook meeting invites with just his name. If he accepted, I'd go ahead and add everyone else. Easy, right? Not so much. One day, after sending an invite, he hollered across the office for me to come to his desk. He was a big, loud guy, so everyone within earshot immediately tuned in. He angrily berated me for booking meetings without checking in person. I tried to explain that the invite was just for him to approve first, but he didn't care. He made it crystal clear: under no circumstances was I to schedule a meeting with him without speaking to him in person first. A couple of days later, an urgent meeting request came in for that same afternoon with higher-ups. The meeting was critical for him to attend, but, of course, he wasn't around to approve it. My manager's second-in-command, who had overheard the earlier debacle, pulled me aside and said, "I know what he told you, but I think you should just book this meeting anyway." I refused, citing the boss's explicit instructions. Unsurprisingly, the meeting didn't happen. The higher-ups weren't thrilled, and my boss took a hit for missing the opportunity. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was a teachable moment for everyone except my boss, who never changed his approach. Story 6. A couple of years ago, I worked at a popular home improvement retailer in the Midwest. Overall, I didn't have major issues with the company. It was retail, so there were always challenging customers, but the story I'm about to share isn't about them. It's about my assistant manager at the time. I was working as a morning stocker in our department, which handled items like pet supplies, paint, and groceries, a bit of a strange combination. There were 3 of us stockers on the team. I had seniority despite only being there for 6 months. One of my coworkers was an older gentleman in his late 60s who was a retired aviation engineer. He had taken up this job because he wanted something active to do, and he primarily handled downstocking, bringing items from the upper shelves to the store floor. Our department manager, who was hands down the best manager I've ever had a system for handling our workload. He'd have us stock the bulk freight, first things like pet food, 5-gallon paint buckets, and cat litter because they were heavy, messy, and could be done quickly. After that, we'd move on to the smaller, more tedious items like candy and over-the-counter medications. His reasoning, he jokingly said, "I don't want the sales team smelling like pet food all day." One Friday, our manager had the day off, and the assistant manager was in charge for the weekend. She decided it was time to make her mark and left us a note with new instructions. Start with the small, tedious items and leave the bulk freight for later. When the other stockers and I read this, we immediately knew it was a bad idea. I told the others to follow the usual plan until I could ask her to clarify when she arrived later that morning. When she came in, I asked her if she was sure about this new system. I explained that bulk freight accounted for most of our workload and could be cleared quickly, leaving room to handle the smaller items later. I even pointed out that we had 10 pallets in receiving, 6 of which were bulk items that we could knock out in under an hour. But she was adamant. "Focus on the small stuff first," she said, "so the sales team can handle the more important tasks." Reluctantly, we followed her instructions. That Friday, we only managed to clear 7 pallets, 4 of them bulk. On Saturday, we stuck to her plan entirely, getting through just 2 pallets all day, despite receiving another 15 pallets overnight. By the end of Saturday, the back aisle was packed with over 10 pallets, and receiving had another 20-30, most of them bulk freight. Monday morning rolled around, and our department manager was back on shift. By 8:30 a.m., the assistant manager realized how badly her plan had failed. She frantically told us to start working on the bulk freight immediately, even asking our 67-year-old downstocker to pitch in. But here's the thing, we were scheduled to leave at 9 a.m., and we all had valid reasons to stick to our schedule. I had class at 10 a.m. and needed to shower beforehand, and my coworkers also had commitments they weren't willing to miss. When the department manager came in at noon, he called me over to ask what had happened over the weekend. I didn't even have to say a word. I simply handed him the notes the assistant manager had left for us. His reaction was priceless. He let out a deep, disappointed sigh, shook his head, and then started laughing. To fix the mess, he told the other stocker and me that whoever cleared the most pallets that morning would get $20. It turned into a friendly competition, and between the 2 of us, we cleared 25 pallets in 2.5 hours. I managed 12, and the other stocker beat me with 13, earning the top prize. Still, I got a $1.10 second-place prize, and we both appreciated the gesture. At the end of the shift, the manager thanked us, handed us our winnings, and told us to go home early to shower because, in his words, "You smell like pet food." To this day, we laugh about that weekend. It's a reminder of how a little common sense and a great manager can make all the difference. Story 7. I'll start by saying that I'm a mom to a 9-year-old boy, and on that day we were getting ready for the big bring your parent to school day. You know, the one where parents pretend they're cool enough to step into the world of 4th graders? Yeah, that day. My son was all excited, telling me about his life in school, showing me his desk and proudly displaying his science project. I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. We walked into the school together, and I could practically feel his pride radiating off him as he showed me around. We'd barely settled into his classroom when the morning chaos began. Kids were rushing around, parents trying to fit into those tiny desks, and the teacher doing her best to keep everyone in check. I squeezed myself into one of those desks, wondering how they could ever be comfortable, and tried to look interested as the teacher explained the math lesson. But then, amid the numbers and equations, I noticed a commotion outside the classroom. Heads turned, whispers spread, and I just knew something was up. Being the nosy mom I am, I excused myself to go look at what's going on. Can't help it. I am who I am. Nosy. There was this lady, Karen, apparently a parent, and she was like a storm cloud of negativity. She was on a mission, and her target was a poor girl with a prosthetic leg. Now, I didn't know the girl personally, but I'd seen her around whenever I picked up my boy from school. Karen didn't waste any time. She pointed her finger at the girl, yelling about how someone like her shouldn't be around her kid or even in his class. How her prosthetic leg was simply an eyesore. My jaw practically dropped. Who says something like that? The poor girl tried to speak up, but her voice barely made a sound. It was like she was trapped in this horrible situation, wanting to fight back, but struggling to find her voice. My heart ached for her. No one should have to endure that kind of cruelty. I couldn't stand by and watch. It was like a switch flipped inside me. I took a step forward, ready to give Karen a piece of my mind. I told her that her behavior was unacceptable, that nobody had the right to treat someone that way, disabled or not. But instead of backing down, Karen turned her fury towards me. It was like poking a hornet's nest. She started yelling at me, accusing me of being a meddler, and telling me to mind my own business. I didn't back down, though. I couldn't. Not when a helpless kid was being treated so horribly. We went back and forth, and the poor girl just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes, and I could see that she was feeling grateful and maybe guilty that someone was standing up for her. Other parents started to gather around, some looking shocked, others shaking their heads in disbelief at Karen's behavior. One parent, a dad with tattoos and a tough-looking exterior, stepped forward and told Karen to chill out and show some respect. And that's when things escalated in a way none of us could have predicted. Karen decided to make her move. I'm not really sure what could have triggered this, but she lunged at the poor girl, her hand raised to slap her. I was horrified. But before anyone could react, a strong hand grabbed Karen's arm from behind, stopping her in her tracks. I turned to see who it was, and there he was, a man in a military uniform, stern-faced and resolute. He had that aura about him, the kind that makes you know he's not to be messed with. He held onto Karen's wrist like a vice grip, and she let out a scream with a confused expression written all over her face. And then, amidst the tension and confusion, a voice cut through the air. It was the disabled girl, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "Daddy." The man's look softened as he turned his attention to his daughter. He let go of Karen's arm and walked toward the girl. He embraced his daughter tightly and kissed her gently on her head. Their moment was so wholesome and heartwarming that it brought a lump to my throat. But the man wasn't done. He turned his attention back to Karen, who was still standing there, baffled and confused. His expression turned from warmth to anger, and he said in a voice that could chill the air, "Next time I hear that you or your kid gave my girl a hard time, I will put you in a wheelchair myself. Now get the hell out of here. Now." Karen scurried off like a little scared dog. The man watched her go, his eyes never leaving her until she disappeared from sight. And then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to his daughter, that stern expression replaced by pure love. As the crowd around us started to disperse, the man in the military uniform approached me with a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up for my daughter. It means a lot," he said. I smiled and shook my head. "No need to thank me. Just couldn't let her be treated that way." He nodded, as if he understood exactly where I was coming from. We struck up a conversation, two parents brought together by a crazy situation. He told me about his deployment, how he wanted to surprise his daughter on Bring Your Parent to School Day, and boy, did he succeed in surprising everyone. We talked for a bit, and I could see the pride in his eyes as he looked at his daughter chatting with her classmates. He mentioned that they were headed to the principal's office to report the whole incident, to make sure this wouldn't happen again. And you could bet that the principal was in for an earful. From that moment on, people treated the girl with respect. Nobody dared to mess with her anymore. Even Karen, she would walk the other way when she saw her, avoiding her like the plague. Oh, and by the way, I looked up the guy, and he turned out to be a captain. No wonder he was so authoritative. And that's how a day that started with the usual chaos of school events ended with an entitled Karen running for the hills. Who says real life isn't as entertaining as the movies?